Hello everyone, welcome back to Yu-Gi-Oh! My name is Greg.
And my name is Joshua.
And I represent the Yu-Gi-Oh! Fan, and Josh.
I am the Yugi newbie.
And today we're talking about episode 6 of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime, specifically the 4Kids dub, titled Episode 6, First Duel. Basic plot of this episode is just that Joey has his first duel at Duel's Kingdom, and he duels the character Mai, who's mostly just been antagonizing them from the sidelines, and now he's finally going to show her what he's made of. Josh,
Great.
you want to start us off with the first events of the episode?
So we get our only appearance of Pegasus here, where he just does his classic evil maniacal laugh and says, haha, finally he says like something about unwitting pawns are finally like starting to like do what they're supposed to be doing, and only the best will survive, which I thought was like a pretty random way to start off the episode. But just reminding us that Pegasus is masterminding all this. I thought it's kind of funny. He's mentioning only the best will survive. And at the start of this episode, we're really starting to kind of doubt Joey's actual talents in Duel Monsters because he starts being really overconfident. But as we know, he has never had an official duel before.
I think that's the point of this introduction of Pegasus, just for the comedic cutaway to Joey to be like, oh, look, Joey doesn't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
And then we get some flashbacks from Joey's perspective with him and his sister Serenity to sort of build that relationship. Josh, did this have any effect on you?
I thought it was fine. I appreciate that they gave it some time, that they actually like showed they're having a fun time at the beach, and Serenity's like, oh, you're the best brother, Joey. I did think it was kind of funny because they're having this great day on the beach, and then Joey at some point he just randomly says like, oh, don't worry, if our parents end up getting a divorce, I know we'll come back here one day.
Yeah, I'm realizing how shocking that is, that actually in like a 4Kids stuff that they would talk about divorce.
Yeah, no, I thought that was really funny.
They would try to hide that.
No, it's super blunt and just out of nowhere. I thought it was kind of funny to just throw that in, but obviously like important, and since that's what ends up happening, I believe we already learned it's obviously important.
Yeah, I'm not saying it's bad that they brought it up. I'm just surprised that they did. Like 4Kids dub's always trying to sanitize everything.
Same. Yeah.
I'm surprised they allowed a divorce issue to be brought into the picture. So then we hear Mai was winning in the distance, and she's like bragging about her psychic powers to her opponent and stuff like that. And then she challenges Joey, and Joey's like, sure, whatever.
Yep.
Let's do it.
Basically.
Even though his friends were encouraging him a few seconds ago to like pick an easy opponent and stuff like that.
Yeah, Tristan and Taya are basically like, hey, no, whoa, don't fight like a major duelist, because he does only have one star chip, so as soon as he loses, then it's out. But I thought it was funny because Yugi's just being classic Yugi, where he's just sitting there, he's like, no, Joey has to decide for himself. And Joey's like, yeah, I'll do it. Why not?
Yeah, he's trying to be supportive. I mean, he is being supportive. It's not even that. Like, I think that's something I'm noticing as you're watching this, is that typically there are times in like shows when characters have to like support each other, and it just comes off as like super cringy and like it doesn't really feel genuine. Here, I think usually Yugi's support of Joey feels pretty genuine, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely feel like with that extra support, we can definitely kind of see how Yugi and Joey are closer than perhaps like Taya and Joey or Tristan and Joey are. Like you feel like those two have more of a connection, which they do, and we've seen.
Yeah, at least that's the one we're highlighting so far.
Yeah,
I feel like we've been able to go through most of these plot synopses without having to actually bring up Tristan or Taya at this point.
Yeah, they're not that important.
And like we kind of talked about in the last episode, Bakura is also hanging around with him at this point in the manga, and like I've had no reason to bring him up so far.
Yeah.
Like, oh, but in the manga, Bakura does nothing at this point.
No, he's more interesting in the show where he's just mysteriously appeared a few times.
Yeah, it's better to not use him than to use him.
Exactly.
So we get into the duel here pretty quick, and then Joey thinks that he's going to have a field advantage with the meadow field because most of his monsters are like warrior types, but then it turns out that 40% of the field is mountain, 40% is forest, and then 20% is meadow. But then even crazier, Mai reveals that she has some kind of crazy card trick where she doesn't have to look at her cards.
Mm-hmm.
In order to pick which one she wants.
We've gotten a lot of hints towards this. Both the audience, we know it because of how she somehow beat Rex Raptor in episode 3.
Yeah.
Which was just a weird thing. So like we're very familiar with this. And then also it's funny because it feels like Joey and Yugi aren't like used to this whole psychic ability thing, but she was just bragging about it to like the duelist she just beat. Maybe they didn't hear that.
It's possible they just didn't hear it. That's yeah.
I thought that was a bit weak, but I mean that's kind of how the show presents things. Is it presents it as a very like they're all seeing it fresh within the confines of the episode. So it was like fine. I was just a little confused because we felt very familiar with this so-called ability. So the fact that they were like, "What is happening?" was a bit strange.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of a lot of the show though. Is that even though we're aware of issues, they're constantly reacting like, "What? I've never heard of it." In this case, I think it's fine. Like you can just accept that they didn't hear really that conversation.
Or they didn't see it or believe it, so I totally
or like, okay, she's ranting about being a psychic, whatever.
Yeah. A
Um,
question about the field power bonus. How does that relate to like the actual power boost?
So basically, what happens is that Joey puts down his swordsman card, and it
Yeah.
gets. I think basically, whenever you're getting the power bonus, I can't. I've done the math in a few duels. You're getting a 30% power boost. So like an 1100 attack point monster getting the power boost would go up to 1430, or a 1300 attack point monster would go up to 1690 because that's 30% of that added on top of the base value. So what are you asking? Sorry.
So I was confused just because you said it was 30%, but
Mhm.
then there was only a 20% meadow. So like, how do those numbers relate?
20% of the spaces on the board are meadow, 40% of them are mountain, 40% are forest. No matter what's getting boosted, it's still going to get the same amount of power boost. It's just
Oh,
you can only have two monsters getting the power boost from meadow spaces because there's no more meadow spaces after that. That's what I mean.
so 20% means that there's two spaces of the 10 that are
Yes.
meadow. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Cool, cool.
That's how I take it.
Yeah, yeah. The point of Yu-Gi-Oh in my head is not the nitty-gritty details. It's more just kind of sitting back and turning your brain off.
Part of my goal of the podcast is to nitpick all the little things that like I wish made more sense, but at the same time, like it's like clear they don't really care. I think this makes sense. I mean, the math all adds up and stuff so far. It's just funny. The real confusing thing is that after Joey and Mai have their first monster battle between her Harpy Lady card and his Swordsman card, is that Yugi keeps shouting, "Oh, your monster doesn't get the field power bonus because the Harpy Lady is resistant to magic because it's a flying monster." I think this is the four kids writers just like not knowing what they're supposed to be writing, the vocabulary of the game. They're just like, okay, so like the flying monster is resistant to the ground monster, so resistance to magic. It's like magic doesn't seem to have any play in this battle at all, like
Yeah.
magic attacks and stuff like that. So I think they're just writing things and like not really worried about if the terms sound good or not. Because yeah, Yugi, the first half of this duel just keeps shouting like, "You're not thinking. It's still resistant to magic."
Yeah, I don't understand what that meant. And there's a lot of things that go on here that are like problematic.
They make sense to me, but they're not being presented correctly. Like I could figure
Yeah.
it all out having watched this episode for, 10 years of my life. But yeah, I think the way that they're explaining it is not very clear.
The way I interpreted it was not like the resistant to magic, whatever. It was more just like, oh, the harpies can fly and the other guy's stuck on the ground, so the flying thing's gonna have an advantage.
It was sort of similar to how an equipped magic card didn't really give a boost to a monster fighting a monster with the field power bonus in the last episode. The way that the life points end up subtracting, it's basically like Joey's monster didn't get the power bonus during that fight. I understand what's going on, but the terms that Yugi's using, just because I think the four kids writers didn't know what they were doing, just made it confusing because like he's shouting about resistance to magic. Magic attacks have nothing to do with what's going on in this duel.
And before we get into the rest of the duel, we should probably get into Mai's reason for dueling, because that's important for the thematic element. Before we start the duel, which I thought was kind of interesting, Joey says, before we start, I want to ask you just one question. Why do you duel? And then she's just like, oh, yep, I want all the expensive cars and the rings and diamonds and expensive lifestyle, everything.
For all the comforts I crave, I love that line.
Exactly. Yeah, comforts I crave. Which, I mean, fits in with her character and fits well within the confines of the show and everything. Because then the whole point of it is that she's just playing for herself and for things, whereas Joey very blatantly he's talking about, you
For my
gotta.
sister, Serenity.
Yeah. I just love how he's like, you gotta find someone to care about and fight for them. It just like everyone has someone they care about, I imagine. Like everyone has family. I don't know. Like
And yeah, just a reminder, listeners, just in case they forgot, that Joey's basically just dueling to pay for his sister's eye operation that she needs, otherwise she'll go blind, which is important for the rest of this episode, I think. Overall, I really like this aspect of the duel that Mai is using this card trick where like she's able to pick her cards without having to look at them. She like sets them all face down on the table in front of her and is able to like just pick them without having to turn them over or anything like that. The way she's using it right now, it's basically just psyching out Joey. First, he's worried like, can she see my cards? How is she doing that? He's more concerned about this than he is about the actual like game that's happening right now. And I really like this aspect of this episode.
me too. I thought it was very effective because she starts like taunting them by Joey by saying things like, that next card you're gonna play, it's not gonna have an effect either. And
Yes.
because she's playing cards out of her own hand that she can't see, Joey's like, she can somehow see my cards as well. Something I noticed, and I'm sure you noticed as well, that I just wanted to note was at the start of this duel, Joey attacks twice with cards that, well, the first time he attacks with a card that just has a lower attack. And I know like this is his first official duel, but like after 2 weeks of training with the grandpa, I feel like he would have slightly more common sense than that.
I complained about Yugi doing this in episode 2, and did he do it in the last episode also, like the duel against Weevil? He might have.
No, not something as blatant as this.
I'm almost more forgiving of Joey doing doing this because it's Joey, but yes, I agree.
So the second time he attacks, they technically have equal attack power, but because of the resistance to magic that Yugi brought up, then it doesn't work. I'm fine with that because Joey thinks that he's going to take out the Harpy Lady.
He really shouldn't, though, because even if he has that power bonus, he still wouldn't win.
Interesting.
1430 versus 1690. He's not going to win this fight.
I'm talking about the second time, I think.
When he uses Tiger Axe.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
okay, yeah, no.
Attack power.
I think that's a totally like believable situation.
That's what I was saying, yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm gonna. So what happens is that when Joey tries again, he basically uses a monster that has the same attack points as the Harpy, even when they're both getting the field power bonus. Like they're getting the same bonus and they have the same base attack. So they should win, but because Harpy Lady can fly, according to this episode, that cancels out his power bonus. So like he still loses, and he's the monster, and he still loses life points and stuff like that. I think that makes sense. It's Joey attacking without thinking, and I think that's part of the episode. So I'm totally down with this mistake that he's making on a narrative level.
It's fine. It doesn't bother me that much, but it's definitely kind of just like a moment where you're just like, oh, Joey, why are you doing this? But I understand why the writers do it, because they're showing his progression throughout the duel.
It just didn't work for me before because like literally the number was smaller than the other number, and it's like he's still attacking. Yeah. But we've seen Yugi make this mistake before, so.
But I do like it because every single move he makes slowly gets more both understandable and effective, I guess.
Yeah, he gets more thoughtful and stuff like that. Would you get into a little slump here, though, where Joey's basically just throwing monsters out in defense mode while Mai keeps charging up her Harpy Ladies and stuff like that? Seems like this happens every episode.
Yeah, basically.
Let's get into the philosophy of this episode a bit more, Josh, shall we? When Teia's like shouting support for Joey, and then Mai starts going off about how the only person that duels can trust is himself. And I do want to highlight that line because, you know, she is specifically saying himself. Like, why would she? I think she might be the only female duelist on this island. Yeah, Mai specifically seems to think it's necessary to just say himself. Again, we have to accept this is an English translation that's being done by a company that's just trying to get their next paycheck by translating the show. But it's still an interesting decision. And the point of questioning something like this is to ask yourself, why would the default be himself, especially when it's coming from the only female duelist in the show so far? Josh, do you have any thoughts?
Like, I feel like there's so many factors you couldn't point to like any specific one. Like obviously, even today, after like there's become a lot more like focus on these kind of like gendered things and everything, the default generally people say is like he or himself or him.
Hey, you guys.
If you're driving, like almost anyone would say like, oh, like he cut me off, even though you don't know like the person driving.
I did it yesterday.
Yeah, so it kind of makes sense to default to that, but it is confusing, especially when it's coming out of her mouth.
I just think it's speaking to, you know, who's writing the show, who the show's aimed at. I'm just bringing it up. I think it's an interesting point, even if the show's not saying anything. I don't think the show's making commentary on it. I think it's just how they were writing it.
Yeah, but it's certainly an interesting example of like, because I haven't seen like something like that kind of strange, like, yeah, something like that happening. I don't have a ton to say about it, but I definitely wanted to note it and think it's interesting.
Yeah, I think that there's some people would actually find I think there's probably some people who would actually sympathize with Mai and her reason for dueling in this episode. It's like, why does she have to be fighting for someone? Isn't fighting for yourself enough sometimes and stuff like that? Obviously, the show is treating her as the villain. The show wants you to be on the side of people who are willing to fight to save other people. But I think that there's a postmodern reading you can do on that and sort of ask questions about why the writers would insist on something like that.
I think they're both coming from very reasonable places, but I do kind of understand why they're placing Joey on a higher pedestal. He does have like a very good reason to be dueling. He's the character we've been following. But I think an argument could definitely be made that both of these characters are fighting for completely understandable and valid reasons.
It'd be interesting to talk to someone who is interested in gender and feminist studies as like their main concentration at like school and stuff, about like if they see Joey is like talking down to Mai and stuff like that, or if they think that Joey's justified in his lecturing of Mai, because, you know, it almost comes across as like mansplaining a little bit.
Yeah.
But anyways, to continue on from that.
Back to the duel. So I was confused. So what Mai actually does is she uses a magic card to make 3 different versions of the Harpy Ladies.
Yeah.
And then she says she can continue to double that every turn, and that's all fine. But then Yugi turns into the Pharaoh so he can better help Joey, I guess. And then he says this line, "Divide and conquer, a strategy that's been used for centuries. Believe me, I know." What is that strategy? Just multiplying your monsters is what he's referring to?
No, I think I love this line. That's one of the reasons I highlighted this, is that I think he literally means what's happening right now in his friend circle, that she's trying to make Joey turn on his friend.
Oh.
It's a little too quick, and I don't think it's as overt. It maybe should have been for a kid's show, but I really like this line because he says specifically, like, don't listen to her, Joey. She's just trying to divide and conquer, referring to them as friends.
Mhm.
I'm pretty down with this line.
Yeah, no, I like that too.
Another part of the line I wanted to highlight is just that he says, a strategy that's been used for centuries, believe me, I know. You obviously know that he's at least called the Pharaoh. We haven't referred to him as that in the show yet. So the show hasn't really shown its hand on who this other spirit is, but we just keep calling him the Pharaoh because we got to call him something. That's sort of trying to hint to you that he's, some kind of ancient being and stuff like that.
True. No, yeah, I hadn't quite thought about all those aspects. They were trying to build this up that Mai was trying to make Joey distrust his friends, but I never really felt that. Like, I don't understand why he wouldn't trust his friends. I can understand him being psyched out because of the psychic abilities. Like, I can totally understand that. Like she was saying, like, oh, your friends are useless. You can only trust yourself or whatever. And it does make him think about how he has to fight Yugi in the future. But I never really felt like her manipulating him into not trusting Tristan, Taya, and Yugi personally.
I could go either way on this. Let's look at it as if Mai's not directly trying to do that, but I think this is just an example of someone acting in like a toxic way. Her mottos in life are all about being alone and trying to like live for yourself and stuff like that. So she's just like forcing those beliefs onto Joey and stuff like that. And as a result, it's like maybe psyching him out. It might have this effect of like psyching him out and making him not trust his friends. He's going to overtly say that once he snaps out of this and just says like, before you were trying to pit me against my friends and turn me against them and stuff like that.
Says that, but like I feel like they just keep saying that, and I never really like felt it or actually felt like I saw it, so that confused me a little bit.
Okay, I sort of understand what you're saying. I would just argue that I don't think Mai's like directly. She didn't go into this duel thinking like I'm gonna turn Joey against his friends and that's how I'm gonna win this match. I think she was mostly just relying on her, fake psychic abilities and stuff like that. What I'll argue is I think she's just indirectly doing it because it's just the kind of person she is. She doesn't like to see people together and stuff like that. She wants to tear people apart because she can't have that herself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. I had a question which you don't have to and shouldn't answer potentially. Yugi and Joey having to theoretically fight each other in the future?
It's going to be weird down the line. We're going to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it all quite yet, but just this whole thing about we are a team, but I also need to win this contest for my sister Serenity. It's like they're just avoiding this awkward conversation about how they're both here to win this competition, but like they won't have this conversation about like, well, can only one of us win the money? Can one of us win the money and also the other one win the grandpa back? It never makes any sense to me. And I think it's just the writers aren't making it clear and it comes across as if Yugi and Joey just won't have this awkward conversation that needs to happen. It's weird. This isn't quite a Yugi uh-oh, but this is certainly just like you need to make this clear because this is confusing.
It would make a lot of sense if Yugi and Joey were both going for the money. Why can't Yugi, who is probably the better duelist, why can't he just win and then they can sneak into the castle now and then get the grandpa and then Yugi gets the prize money and gives Joey the money he needs to save Serenity? I don't understand why.
No, again, it's just I don't think it's clear. It still doesn't make sense to me. And I'm just gonna say maybe it'll make sense once we finish the season. Now that we're like watching the show so like closely and critically and stuff like that. To my memory, this never makes sense. Like we get to a point where I'm just like, well, I don't know what they thought was gonna happen.
And my other thing with this, with dealing with the actual rules of the tournament, in that Mai is claiming that Yugi and Joey will eventually have to fight each other. But I thought the way it was working was that whoever is the first to get 10 star chips will be the first to get the opportunity to fight Pegasus in the castle. So, and because like I think there's more than just 5 duelists in the tournament, you would be able to fight and get enough star trips without having to fight every single person on the island.
I don't think I can say anything without giving stuff away.
Oh, no, please don't.
I think we're getting into probably my favorite part of the episode is just how Joey has to realize that Mai's lying to him and, Mai's trying to just psych him out. And I love the way that he goes about this. I really like this part in the manga that I'm going to make the picture for the video once we post this on YouTube, but I hope you're looking at it right now, Josh.
Yeah.
It's just these 5 panels from the manga that basically show that Joey's closing his eyes and trying to figure out, as he says in the episode of the anime, I just got to concentrate on how to win the game. I got to stop listening to Mai's nonsense. And there's this detail here that I believe is in the uncut version that we talked about a few times. And then it also is from the manga, obviously, as you're seeing right now, that he specifically says, like, oh man, I don't want to let my sister go to a place like this of just pure darkness, meaning like if she goes blind. That's not in the episode. I kind of wish it was. It creates this interesting bridge that might not be satisfying, but I think works overall where like at first he closes his eyes and says, I don't want to send my sister to a place like this, or I don't want my sister to end up in a place like this. But having his eyes closed is actually what illuminates him to the solution to his problem, which is he's able to detect what Mai's really doing. doing, which I think is just kind of this funny little road of like, well, I don't want my sister to be here, but while I'm here, I'm figuring something out. I think it's more just like coincidentally this moment of like self-reflection and sympathy for his sister in his own head helps him have a moment of meditation, and he like realizes that Mai is a fraud psychic.
I actually like that a lot more in the manga. In the show, it's presented as this moment of kind of self-reflection where he's taking a moment away from the duel and taking a moment to think. Because a big part of this episode has been like, Joey, you're making moves without thinking. It's like, which is confusing. I mean, it's Joey, and there's a lot of like hype and a lot of emotion going into the duel, but it's confusing because if you're playing a game about strategy, you probably want to strategize. So it's confusing that he hasn't been thinking before now. But I like the way the show presents it.
He's learning how to. I mean, again, the point of the Joey character is he's just this guy that would rely on his bronze over his brains, and now he's having to figure out how to rely on his brain. Again, it's Yu-Gi-Oh! I'm okay with how broad this is. It's like how not thoughtful he is about this strategy game. I'm totally okay with it.
I just like more how it's presenting this in the manga, where he's kind of closing his eyes and taking a moment to really understand how his sister might feel if she doesn't get the surgery. There's just a lot more going on there. It's a moment of self-reflection, but also it has like a lot of moving parts there with his relationship with his sister and trying to empathize with her. And then almost in a way, thematically, it works because Joey's saying like, oh, if you cared about someone, then you might win the duel. And this is like a very direct thing here because Joey, because he's caring about someone, is trying to empathize with him, and then because he closes his eyes, he figures out how Mai is using her psychic powers. So I like how that's done a bit better than how it's done in the show.
So then after he opens his eyes again, he's able to announce to everybody, like, I see what you're doing. And the reveal is that Mai sprayed all of her different cards with different perfumes. So like all 40 cards have a different perfume sprayed onto each one. So she's able to just smell and tell the difference between each card, which is insane.
Absolutely.
I'm sure somebody can do it on this planet, but again, this is Yu-Gi-Oh! It's anime, it's fine. It's just such a funny, like, I don't know if I would have ever guessed that was the twist.
Oh, I would not have. When I saw that, I was like, okay.
It's pretty far out there.
It's cool, but obviously not very realistic because when you're just sitting there, like,
I'm sure somebody can do that, but yeah, it's crazy.
She's too far away from the cards to be able to know, like all of the things would. But like, sure. I'll give it. It's fine. I don't really.
Yeah. I guess one thing I want to bring up is that I remember how we talked about in the manga, they're just like sitting at a normal table together, and then they're inside this like virtual reality box. That's what makes the holograms. So basically, they're closer together.
Mm-hmm.
Was it weird in the anime at all that Joey could so clearly? I guess just right at the beginning of her doing this trick, was it weird to you that Joey could so clearly see what she was doing, or did you just accept it because of the way the show's presented and everything? It didn't bother you.
You mean that like that
they're so far away in the duel stadiums? Did it look at all awkward to you that Joey could like see like, whoa, how are you choosing your cards like that? Or did it not like
the only thing with the distance that was confusing to me is how he could smell from that far away? Like, it's outside.
Yeah, I guess just generally he was smelling a bunch of different perfumes. No, you're right. And then I think that might be a lost in translation thing where they just didn't want to rework that after the distance had been changed. Because like certainly if they were sitting at like a small table together, it would have been a lot cleaner in terms of like believing that, right?
Yeah, no, that would have made a lot more sense. Like it's confusing how Rex Raptor didn't notice that when they were inside of a small room together. The smells would be a lot more potent.
I'll say, yeah. I'm gonna give this show a lot of leeway with things like that. The point is thematically that Joey is finally taking a chance to sit back and kind of think for a second and sit in silence, where Rex is obviously just like thinking about something else probably during the duel.
Oh, of course. That's like, it's like one of the complaints. It's like, oh, that's unrealistic, or like, oh, it's dumb. That's not like an actual problem. It's just something like, oh, that was like, yeah, like she wouldn't be able to smell and tell which one from that far away, or Joey wouldn't be able to smell from that far away. But it's like, I don't care. I still like this. Like, Yu-Gi-Oh!
Doesn't hurt the narrative. It's just funny. So then we get one of my favorite lines from the Pharaoh, which is after Joey finally figures out what the card trick is, and he's more focused on the game now. And Taya asks, like, what's he supposed to do now? And then Tristan's like, I don't know. Ask an expert. Ask Yugi. And then the Pharaoh says, it's Joey's duel. He has to figure it out. Oh, I love that so much. It shows such a respect. He's not trying to patronize his friend. He's trying to let his friend figure out his own battles for himself sometimes because he thinks that he trusts him enough to do that. Stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I agree. I like the way that they're presenting that, where they're on their own. But what I did find funny was, I forget how it leads into this, but Joey's like, oh, what card do I need to play? I wish Yugi could tell me. And it's like, wait, maybe he already has.
Mm-hmm. And that's fine because it's showing that he was paying attention.
Yeah, and I do like this as well because it's referencing the third episode again, where we saw Yugi give Joey some cards, including what is most important here, the Time Wizard. And Yugi presents it by saying, "Oh, this ought to get you out of a tight spot." And so he's like, "Oh, I remember that now."
I think there's a little bit of cheat there. Like as much as I love the line about how Pharaoh's saying like, Joey has to figure out on his own. There's still this moment where like the Pharaoh is explaining to Joey like, but she's relying on one monster for her entire strategy. So what do you think, Joey? And it's like, yeah, it's fine, but I wish Yugi would have kept quiet because it would have meant that Joey really was figuring this out for himself. But oh well, it's
Yeah,
fine. Can I point out a line that I just don't understand for the life of me?
sure.
Before we get to Thousand Dragon, Time Wizard and stuff, Joey plays his baby dragon card. And then Mai's response is to laugh at it and say, I almost wish it was worth more. So when I devastate you, it would do more damage to your life points. I have no idea what that means.
That made no sense to me either.
I wish it had more attack points so you would take more damage to your life points, even though that's not how damage is dealt in this game. Again,
Yeah.
this isn't really a problem. Like we said, we're not going to harp on the rules not making sense as a way to be critical of this show. But like when the characters are saying lines that like make absolutely no sense and don't even like string you along in terms of like the thematics of the duel, it's just confusing. Like Yugi shouting about like resistance to magic, I at least know what they're trying to say. This line, I have no idea what they're trying to say.
Yeah, I have no idea because yeah, it's literally like if you had more attack points, then he would take less damage. That's just how it works.
It's almost like she was supposed to be saying like, I wish it was a bigger monster so like it would be more epic when I killed it.
Yeah,
She says something like that in another duel she'll have with someone else later. But that line, I don't know what I don't know what supposed to be getting out of that one. So basically, just Joey's able to break out his Time Wizard card and his Baby Dragon card. Then he uses the Time Wizard monster card to turn his Baby Dragon into an older dragon known as the Thousand Dragon. But it also has the consequence of turning the Harpy ladies into older Harpy ladies and weakening their attack. And he's able to attack and win the duel. Yugi turns back into little Yugi and just says, "I'm proud of you, Joey." And then credits.
I do think this was a very satisfying duel, like the way it progressed. It was short, so it definitely felt a bit less like a grand as some of the previous duels we've seen. But I don't know, the Weevil duel felt kind of disjointed, and then like the Pegasus duel, I know you had problems with. I think the first duel, like with Kaiba, is obviously a very good duel. But I felt like this one was very well self-contained, and then the whole Time Wizard thing was a very satisfying. It just made sense as a conclusion. So I thought it was a pretty satisfying closer here.
Even though the show still can't seem to decide if Time Wizard's a monster card or a magic card, because like Joey refers to using it as using a magic card. The show seems to not be able to decide what Time Wizard is. We still haven't seen Joey use a spell card, so like you could say he's still not using the full strategy of the game, but that's fine. It's his first duel. I'm okay with it. Josh, would you recommend episode 6, First Duel?
Definitely. I thought it was a very good episode for Joey. I thought it was an interesting episode to continue Mai as kind of a background side slash villain character. I thought it was thematically very well presented, very self-contained, and I thought it was a good continuation of the show overall.
I think this is my favorite episode so far. It's hard to pick. That first episode's so epic and awesome, but like even when we went into this podcast kind of expecting me to be somewhat of a hater on this show, every time I watch this episode I tear up whenever Joey figures out Mai's tricks and like when the Pharaoh says like, it's Joey's duel, he has to figure it out just because I look up to that respect so much. I absolutely love this episode. This has got to be one of my favorites. I don't know if I love it more than the first episode. I think I might, honestly, just because like I love how this episode approaches the philosophy it wants to talk about how the game is being played and stuff like that. There's a few question mark moments, but nothing that approaches a Yu-Gi-Oh moment, nothing that's like a terrible insult to the narrative of the show. Yeah, I really love this episode.
Yeah, no, it may have sounded like we were kind of going hard on it previously, but really I want to reemphasize that all of those things were mostly just like small little things that didn't make sense. But overall, thematically, as an episode, this was really effective. And honestly, probably, in my opinion, the tightest so far in like slowly presenting a story, presenting its themes, and feeling like a very cohesive and then really strong episode in that aspect. So I definitely agree.
So a big difference I'd say here between like the problems I had with the duel and the second episode is the problems I had with the duel in the second episode were really hurting the themes of that episode. Here, I don't think that's ever really a problem. The only problem is just I'm sometimes confused about what the technicals of the duel are, but it's not affecting at all how well the themes are being tackled and stuff like that, and the message is being made.
Exactly.
All right, well, I think that's it for us today on Yu-Gi-Oh! Join us next time for when we talk about Yu-Gi-Oh! Episode 7, Attack from the Deep.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a manga series originally created by manga artist and author Kazuki Takahashi, and originally published in Shonen Jump Magazine. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime was created by Gallop Company Limited, and the English dub primarily discussed in this podcast was produced by 4Kids Entertainment. This podcast is a non-profit media content, and created for entertainment purposes only. All rights of content discussed and music used go to their respective owners. We hope you'll join us next time.